So no, if you want to emphasise a point, there's no...
Yes.
You can't be emphatic. And you at home.
Yeah.
Break the fourth wall. I was thinking more sort of like anecdotal side comments whilst like that, you know,
Yeah.
everybody's
Or sort of Kevin Spacey. Well, guys, it's wonderful to have many different interesting people assembled in the same room. Today we're talking about value and what that means to the arts. But I'm going to start off just by asking you to first just briefly introduce yourself with a short bio and a description of what your involvement in the arts is. I'm going to go counterclockwise, just to be different.
So I'm Ian Francis. I set up Flatpack Film Festival just over 10 years ago. I've been doing film and arts events around Birmingham for nearly 20 years now. And I guess, yeah, I don't know, when I left university I didn't think I was going to work in this field. It seemed like a sort of far-fetched dream, and somehow it gradually became slightly more feasible as I went along. And yeah, I've just got the bug for putting on gigs, really. I think that's what really turns me on, is making things happen. People always ask if I'm a filmmaker. I've never made films in my life, but for some reason bringing an audience together with interesting work is something that excites me.
Me next.
And to you.
Thank you, sir. I'm Ed King. I'm founder and editor of Birmingham Review and Birmingham Preview. It's a regional arts and culture publication, both online and in print. I've also had about, let me count backwards now, 20 years experience doing public relations work within the arts in Birmingham, across a whole different sector of genres.
I'm Sally Pennington. I'm joining you from Town Hall, Symphony Hall. I'm a development manager. My focus is on individual giving. That includes memberships, legacies and ticket donations and one-off campaigns. I started my career in the arts straight from university. I did an internship at South Bank Centre, and then I came up to Birmingham Hippodrome.
I'm Linda Saunders. I'm Strategic Director for Dancexchange, who, along with the Hippodrome, produce the International Dance Festival Birmingham, which is probably why I'm slightly out of phase, as we only finished really officially yesterday. I've worked in the arts for a few years, but ended up in the arts entirely by accident when I went to manage the public in West Bromwich. So that was quite a baptism of fire. Mm-hmm. I'm currently on the board at MAC and Millennium Point Trust. And I think in the same way as Ian came into the arts wanting to make things happen, what drew me in was the belief that I want people to be empowered and to be able to see the world differently. And for me, that's what the arts has always done on a personal level. And now I'm in the privileged position of being able to make other people have that opportunity.
And my name's Skinder Hundal. I'm here, I guess, as with two hats. I'm chief exec of New Art Exchange, which is a contemporary visual art space in Nottingham, in the neighbourhood of Hyson Green. But I'm also an area council member for Arts Council for the Midlands. And, so my interest in art and culture is, I guess, connecting people, connecting communities, looking at how we can be local and global, and how we can define and think about really what's going on and who are we, and where are we going as a society.
Interesting. And this is the question again to everyone. How would you say that, it's interesting hearing that you come to it from very different, angles and for different reasons, but how have the arts affected your life experiences? Maybe that for you is the first encounters that you've had with arts, but what role did that play in, and what role do the arts play in your day-to-day life?
Well, I can pick that up quite easily.
Please.
I think there's this is going to sound quite trite, but it's an honest cliche, if you can have such a thing. Arts is about expression, so whatever that means for the individual, it's an incredibly visceral and personal thing. To be alive means that you express yourself. To be alive fully means to express yourself. To be able to do that professionally as well is a very privileged place to be. So once you're in that realm and you can cross the two over, I think it's very difficult to do anything else, really. So I mean, I kind of started because I loved music, so I got into promoting music. Then I learned to write. Now I love writing, so that's what I do, and I'm very privileged to work in a professional capacity within that as well.
Yeah, I guess implicit in that is that art must be an integral part of your everyday dealings and
yeah,
the wider conversation of value. I mean, how involved is the arts in your day-to-day affairs? Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because when I came across art itself, I was brought up in a very culturally vibrant sort of upbringing, where on a weekly basis there would be a cultural sort of moment, a cultural event happening, and there's something interesting between art and culture, and then art with culture, and how art moves culture. So when I entered art, this was about 1992. I'd finished university as a scientist, as an engineer kind of background. I entered this sphere of a place called Dancexchange in Hyson Green, and I saw people talking about very important things about the world and how it was affecting communities, and how culture or cultural perspectives were not being enabled within the arts and cultural scene. So it was my entry point was actually about finding the second generation's confidence, and that representation came through art, which could then articulate culture in a way that would then transform the aesthetic of what art is, and how it's represented then in sort of the sector or the mainstream spaces.
Absolutely, because you're implying as well that art itself, or these discussions, come with particular social, community, cultural outlook. You know, art gave you that in a way that engineering or some other vocations don't. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's the representation of the ordinary person or the ordinary man in the sense that, you know, that narrative or that confidence to enter those spaces is often something that still needs challenging, but it has been improving. I mean, we've seen that.
Absolutely.
I think the thing with, just to sort of jump on the back of that and maybe make my own point slightly clearer, you're free to do whatever it is as an individual and experience and express that in your way within the arts sector. There's other sectors that are more rigid. So I think once you learn that spectrum of expression, it's difficult to live in any other way, and it becomes your mandate for life, and art becomes your mandate for life in the way that you operate, as opposed to sort of the other way around.
Let's talk about twin processes there, finding your manhood in a sense, or coming of age in a context where you have value, you're given value, but also it's almost supernatural ability that we have of artists to create a narrative for ourselves, to create an identity, you know, and to contextualize who we are within the world.
And the other too. It's I and the other.
Yes.
And how the other becomes part of the I in our moment of change, because we come and we're born into certain families, certain traditions, certain cultures that have a fixed regiment of some sort. And what we're doing is, as artists or art producers, curators, we're trying to challenge those perspectives to then, you know, explore the haze between who we are.
I grew up in a really very, very rural environment, very closed environment, and where there were expectations that were very simplistic about people's lives. And actually being able to look at art made me imagine that there was a different world to the one I'd grown up in. And I think that's vital for so many people, because, you know, in terms of the bigger worldview and why I'm a passionate advocate for the arts, is people need to have that bigger worldview. We live in a complex world where it's far too easy for us all to sit in our nice, comfortable little corners, and actually we need to be challenged and to look more widely.
Absolutely.
And that imaginative, creative process is what enables us to do that.
Has anyone ever had an encounter with art that's made them question all of their precepts, all of their paradigms, anything that's, you know?
Something that's happened recently in terms of music is I've started to appreciate contemporary classical composers, which is an oxymoron to me. I don't see how those two words can sit next to each other, but I never thought that was a genre that I was allowed to understand. And because I was introduced to it in a really personal way and in a really honest way, it's opened up a whole new spectrum. This is about 3 years ago, so I'm 38 years old, and I'm now experiencing this totally new wonderful thing within a sector of art that I thought I knew everything I was going to know about, and that challenged me. And
but then you're also not mentioning that there's in some sense an industry or people whose raison d'etre it is to make that music impenetrable, to make that gallery space. It goes back to the 19th century and art for art's sake, and mass literacy versus let's keep an artistic elite that are the only ones that get it.
There's a really funny episode of Yes Minister, which I was toying with whether I was going to reference within this conversation, but
Too late.
Humphrey Lyttelton is having exactly this conversation about, it's to do with arts funding, and Jim Hacker's trying to give this money to a football club, and he's trying to keep it for an opera, I think, or something like that. And it just highlights the elitism within certain spheres of arts funding, and how it's become like the gin culture of the bourgeoisie. It can control the masses through ignorance, and it can separate the elitist through their purported understanding of something that the proles aren't going to get. And I think one of the really important things that we all have a responsibility for is to challenge that wall, break through it.
I think where there's a difficulty with that is in development and in fundraising. We're almost kind of putting, especially for individual giving, it's kind of a price tag on art. You're kind of selling it to people into kind of products to get them to sponsor it or support it in some way. And of course, people that are able to support to certain levels do tend to be from a certain part of Birmingham,
sure,
or have a certain amount of wealth. But at the same time, you don't want it to become elite. So some of the benefits that we offer to our patrons, we have to be very, very careful that we're not saying, well, you're at the front of the queue, you get that kind of special experience that other people don't get. So really, I think when it comes to development schemes and our products that we sell, especially here at Town Hall, Symphony Hall, have to make sure that are available to everyone, depending on.
I think you're also highlighting two different processes, that which is endorsing or getting subsidy for art, which is already considered to have value, and other processes which Birmingham's proved to actually been at the forefront of several times, grassroots cultural movements happening that then become monetized, that then these well patronized organizations want to have a piece of, because you know. So Ian, you've got anything to say on that?
In the context of Birmingham, our cultural industries, our kind of arts sector grew out of 19th century industrialists wanting a kind of status symbol, and there's still an element of that in our cultural offer. I would say we've got the big neoclassical palaces of culture, and then the kind of weirder stuff around the margins. And one of the big challenges is creating a bit more of a bridge between those two worlds, I suppose. And
the discussion has been in the past 10, 15 years. Yeah, you're at the bridge between those two worlds. How do these well-funded institutions philanthropically go out, or vice versa? Can they engage with them? And that is fraught with all sorts of interesting tensions.
And it's more than turning up in an area of deprivation or ethnic diversity and saying, we are the CBSO, come and enjoy our white orchestra playing to you. And I think, a lot of what we've done in the past has been about funding those traditional organisations to go out and do good, rather than saying, actually, there's good there, and how do we actually bring and make more of that within the city. And it's such a challenge, isn't it? Because some real creativity comes from people being independent of the funding sector, but without some form of funding, it is really hard for people to actually get off the ground, and there's a real tension there. And then, as you say, when you're selling benefits to patrons, by definition, they often come from a fairly narrow set of people who have an expectation and a view about what they enjoy or should enjoy. And that means that they put funding into that, but maybe not into some of the other things that are interesting and vibrant about the city. And
it can be quite easy to change their mind, though. Sometimes, very often with us, we take people to watch things or to kind of hear things, and they will change their mind. They'll be totally fall in love with something, which is wonderful. As somebody that's in a development team, if you can change somebody's mind that goes, no, it has to be an orchestral piece and it has to be this, then suddenly you take them to something and go, this is how we see it, and they change their mind. It's absolutely amazing.
But the idea of the future of the arts just being dependent on a few well-intentioned benefactors is pretty scary as well. So maybe a mixed economy is where...
Definitely, yes, definitely.
Which hands over nicely to our public.
Well, I was just going to say about, you talk about inspirations and maybe things that have moved you and transformed you. And by observation, it's quite interesting what you see and what happened. I always remember when... Fears Festival some years ago did a film series about the Middle East. And it's quite pioneering, really, because all this situation that we hear about today hadn't erupted to that level. I think it was post 9/11, so the context was right. But if we were to revisit those films and how it actually creates a real wider understanding of some of the cultures, the journeys, and there was one film in particular, Le Grand Tour, I think it was called, where a father and a son go on a tour from France, Paris, all the way to Mecca, and the journey and the bond between the father and son, the differences between one generation and the other. And these are issues that people are facing in their own communities constantly. And these films were presented in places like Smethwick. They're also in the MAC, and they're also in mainstream AMC theatres. So for example, it was taking the art into very popular spaces, very neighbourhood spaces, very art spaces. And in so doing, it was engaging audiences and changing people's perceptions. And I think that's what's really exciting about what art and culture can do.
I'll start with you, Ed. What do you think Birmingham or Britain without the arts would look like?
Do you know, I read this question. I had a brief sort of look at the prompts this morning. The word bleak kept coming up time and time again, some kind of Orwellian dystopian nightmare. But I think you've got to get that answer, you just look at areas, whether it's people or societies that don't benefit from the arts. And you can often see that without that form of expression, or without that cultural expression, that people are more concerned with how much money they're earning, which is not necessarily the most healthy thing in the world. They're less concerned with community organisations, community projects. Once you start sort of tapping on that door, I think it goes beyond arts, and it actually frees people up to embrace a wider whatever it is. So
are there any places where the people don't appreciate art, or is it simply that it's not called art?
Well, West Brom has an interesting history. Well, no, I mean, it was. Go for it. I mean, do you want to pick that one up?
I think superficially, you know, and what used to frustrate the hell out of me is that people in Birmingham think that West Brom is some sort of cultural desert. Of course it isn't. Lots of people are engaged in all sorts of cultural activity, but had very little means to actually do that. And I think during our time at the Public, we increased visitor numbers. You know, by the time we closed, we would have had 500,000 people through the door. That's a respectable figure for any gallery. Just before we closed, we had an exhibition by a guy called Vivan Sundaram from Delhi, who made art out of street debris and fashion. So he manufactured it as high fashion. And that just absolutely tapped into people's understanding of the world, because there was something that was visually exciting and meaningful to many people and accessible because it dealt with fashion, but actually the messages behind it about our society and society in India for that matter were really profound, and people, you know, people would pop in between going to Lidl or wherever for their shopping and discuss it and comment on it and have a view about it.
I guess there are two layers in that question really, which is what would happen if centres like the Public, the Drum, as is happening, just vanish and there's nothing there with those art centres, versus what happens if there's no creativity in what the place of art itself. Because people will continue to paint, they'll continue to make music without these centres, but what are the merits of both?
I just want to follow up, because I worked with Linda towards the closure of the Public, and it was really interesting for me because I had no experience with the venue before I went up to support the campaign to keep it open. And the overwhelming response from the council, I'm sure they've got their facts and figures and they've got their mandates and they need to do what they need to do, was so patronising to the people of West Brom. This is not for you. You won't understand this. Get it. And when we went out and we did Vox Pops, we had the largest petition that had ever been handed into Sandwell Council to support it, and that was grassroots within 2 weeks.
Brilliant. Sally, I'm curious. So, what do you think Birmingham would look like if all of these patrons suddenly just left and stopped sponsoring the arts and sponsored banks instead or something?
Well, it would be awful. It would be terrible for exactly the same reasons as what you guys are saying. I mean, having an arts venue or any arts organisations is kind of has a close relationship with economies and businesses and young entrepreneurs. So all of those things, if we don't have arts within Birmingham, then we could potentially lose all that. We could lose all the young professionals that are coming into the city and, you know, buying and renting flats. And so all of these things have a massive butterfly effect.
I get a sense that we're to some extent preaching to the choir. I'm an artist, we're all artists. But there are many people out there who think, you did Swan Lake this year, that doesn't affect me and my day-to-day thing. And you're talking about renting, and again, this is still societally quite a small group of people that will afford the ticket prices, that will come and benefit from those corollary things of the sorts of arts you're talking about. What about for Fred blogs? And it's not, you know, anyone can answer this question. What do you think?
Well, I think that's, well, I mean, I think that's an interpretation of what people think the ticket prices are in venues such as Town Hall, Symphony Hall. So very often we have a soundbite scheme here for students. So if you're 16 to 25, you can get tickets for like a £5 or even sometimes free tickets. For a classical show, they kind of start at, I think, £8.50. I still understand it can still be a decision, but you know, it's not a £55 show every time. And you know, organisations such as ours has a responsibility, because in the end we're creating young new audiences. If we don't do that, then who's going to be here in 30 years' time filling our halls? So
it's just kind of kernel of the debate that the arts is continually viewed as a bit self-indulgent and we're sort of whimsical and storm out of studios, painting in a fury.
I have met a few people.
I've met a few. We've all met a diva or two. We've all met a diva or two in our time. And then it's sort of how much as a city do we really value the arts if that's the only thing that we're using to compare?
I think an interesting place to have this conversation, or to a case study to use, is Digbeth. Now, you've got an area of Birmingham that was dilapidated, that was unused other than industrial use. You had the Greys move in and do what they did with the custard factory. You had the Irish Centre do it. You had various people moving and operating with that area. They created such a buzz around this derelict part of Birmingham, right on the outskirts of the city centre, that now the property developers have moved in and seen it as potential revenue. Now that they've come in, they're trying to control that so they don't have the noise abatement issues, they don't have blah, blah, blah. I had to, again, work with the custard factory to stop a closure notice against them. It's the balance, and it's the notion of the creative industry, the impact that creative industries have, and then when it moves into a higher level, the respect that should carry on with that. And I think what's being missed is that seat at the bigger table by some people.
And it's actually part of the gentrification debate is art. You know, Brixton's a trendy, arty place to live. Hoxton's just lovely art there. Come in and kill all the art and nobody says sorry afterwards.
I was just going to say the investment into art and culture, you know, the public investment into the art and culture and what it does. You know, there's much evidence to show the impact of that investment in terms of creative industry, in terms of economy, in terms of placemaking, inward investment into regions, into places, into cities, and how cities brand themselves around these iconic kind of investment projects, which we've seen over these years. And I always say, if you took oxygen out of air, how long would humanity last? I think art is like oxygen, really. You know.
I'm assuming that you must have in the Arts Council as well look at some of these indices and chart what are the benefits in quite material terms to the city from art. Does that come up?
Yes, of course. I mean, at Area Council we look at several measures, and one of them is about the impact on economy, seeing how the participation within arts, because you know you talk about who's it really for, you know. And when you start analysing the contribution, so Birmingham's a good example of a very vibrant scene, actually, multi-layered. I mean, you've got iconic kind of big named organisations that don't just present art in their venues. They actually go out to the community and deliver projects with schools, with communities, and they're invested in that way. I think also if you look at, you know, the contribution of the independent sector. And the creativity that comes out of that, the innovations that come out of that, the connections, the stories, the narratives that then represent and unify a city, and also then the snowball impact of that network to the other network to that network. It starts to create a sense of identity, a purpose, a value, happiness. These essential qualities that give you hope, give you love, trust within a community. So the investment indices that we look at Arts Council are around participation, engagement. There are challenges, challenges around, does the sector impact on culturally diverse communities as it could be doing? How does it enter into certain socioeconomic groups and neighbourhoods? And
it's not that art isn't happening there.
No.
It's that there's no provision for that to be considered art. Well, I need to move the discussion a little bit, and I'm sure we'll have some strong opinions about this. But Birmingham just doesn't appreciate the arts as much as Liverpool and Manchester. Do you agree? And if so, what do we do here? Already chiming in.
Well, I just wonder, it kind of leads on from what Skinder was just saying, really, because it's, we beat ourselves up with Manchester or Newcastle or whoever all the time. That's part of Birmingham's makeup, to be self-deprecating until someone else from outside slags us off, and then we get really bolshy. But in fact, when you look at it, we've had people moving here from some of those other cities and being blown away by what's here, but also surprised because they don't realise a lot of it's there. So I think it's really a challenge of, how do we present this stuff more clearly? It's not a lack of activity. You've got that amazing infrastructure from years of decent amounts of investment, which is under threat, and you've also got that independent culture where I think people are just kind of getting on with it and doing their own thing. There is a really interesting ecosystem there that's very uncliquey, very collaborative, and just kind of gets on with it. And I think it's really about harnessing that potential. That's Birmingham's challenge, and it's not really had a cultural vision, particularly the city. And that maybe that's a good thing in a way, because there's no kind of top-down control. But at the moment, it's really about gathering that together and in a more coherent shape.
The adjunct to the question is, what can we do to increase local arts engagement? And you're almost saying it's happening anyway.
Yeah, but there's it's not to be complacent necessarily, and there are loads of people who are not engaging with it. I'm talking partly from a festival's point of view. We've been talking to a lot of the city's festivals the last year or so, having more of a conversation about how we get out there, and you're conscious that 1.2 million people in the city, and lots of them don't even know there's a festival calendar or think that there's festivals are for experts or for industry people or whatever, and shifting that when, and I think that's why you see a lot of, one of Birmingham's cultural scene strengths is using spaces in interesting ways, not just the venue-based organisations, but a lot of stuff happening in public squares and warehouses and
motorway flyovers.
Yeah, indeed. You've got a flyover show, you've got Birmingham Opera, you've got Stan's Cafe, you've got Icon doing amazing off-site stuff. I think it's like when we have international visitors, they're really struck by what a weird, fascinating jumble it is architecturally, and that's a really useful canvas to work with.
We do get compared with Manchester, Liverpool, etc. But actually, it's about the language and the articulation of what Birmingham is. And I think it's a Midlands thing as well. It's not apathy or anything like that, because it is a very can-do culture here. And people just get on with it. They don't brag about it and show off about it, or articulate in a way that says, look what we've achieved.
As opposed to Bristol or even Coventry that have done that.
Bristol are very good at it. Certainly Manchester and the northern partners are very strong. Newcastle as well. They had a whole major development over the last 10, 15 years, and they really shout about it. I think, in Birmingham, people just get on with it. And I have to say, it's incredibly vibrant, from an investment point of view. If you look at £100 million worth of investment goes into Birmingham, the last sort of season of investment from Arts Council.
And how that compares with roughly
sounds
like a lot to me.
It's a lot. It's more than what Manchester gets, which is quite interesting, isn't it? But you assume that Manchester gets more. And actually, it's distributed better here in that sense as well. Yeah. Whereas in Manchester, you'll find that there might be more investment going into a particular model. But that model is there also for a purpose, because it's about offering something that's going to have an impact. And I think that, in Birmingham, you've got a very interesting layered mix. And of course, there's always, there's always an opportunity to challenge that and change that and bring in new ventures, new networks. But I would say that Birmingham, its offer is immensely diverse.
And I think that's the feedback, certainly in the dance world, we're getting, is that people are choosing to base themselves in Birmingham rather than, and moving out of London to come to Birmingham, because that vibrancy is growing from the independent sector through to the big institutions. And that helps make it feel like it's actually a viable, vibrant scene that can grow.
I think there are two Birminghams, and it's something that came up in a previous discussion. For some, they sense this tremendous opportunity and they're given a platform to do so. For others, it can feel like, as I said, with these centres closing like the Drum and ACMC, that there's no place, there's no platform, and your ideas won't be taken seriously unless it's with this paternalistic idea of we're going to teach you how to do art. So I don't buy the idea it's all doom and gloom, but I don't think it's an easy straight sailing thing.
No, but the challenge is how do you make art the everyday experience? Because we know the transformational impacts of art and creativity. And if everybody did art, I think we'd have a more peaceful world. Absolutely. And I think it is for those areas where they're not seeing it as art. It's a big driving thing behind it. I mean, Ed knows, behind the Flyover show, that this dichotomy, this perceived displacement of high art and low art, when hip-hop culture has its own aesthetics, it has its own values. It's not just community art.
The thing with, I was kind of wanted to use the Flyover show as an example for that. And I remember the one that really sticks out in my head was after the riots. And we were 2 weeks, I think, after the riots, and the police station up the road had burnt down, all these kind of problems. And I spoke to you about it thinking we shouldn't do it. Maybe we should call it. We had 2 uniformed officers turn up in the afternoon, walk around the site and say, this is absolutely fine. If you need us, give us a shout, but you'd be fine. The community looked after its own because it valued the event it was at. And the reason that was allowed to happen was because of arts funding. Now, I'm a big advocate of commercial sustainability when it comes to the arts, but I think there are projects that are important, such as the Flyover show.
I'd say, the funding made it possible, but the reason there wasn't any trouble was nothing to do with the funding. It's because it's embedded in the community. Yeah. Even now, as of course, people, as I walk through, are asking me when's the show coming, what are we going to do with it? And that sense of ownership is something that, if you're just bussing in expensive art somewhere, they're never going to feel.
I had an amazing experience the other day. It was with Creative Black Country, and they're doing a project called Desi Pubs. And they took it to South Bank at Alchemy. And for the first time, you had 40-odd landlords of Punjabi mainly at origin rock up, like Only Fools and Horses or something. As they're coming in, they're dressed up. And this was the first time they were going into such a space. But to see their expression, and to see their narrative shared within a contemporary festival of high repute.
It seems quite revolutionary, doesn't it?
It is, but it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be, but it is.
No. But this is the thing. So these new models of, there's an investment called Creative People, Creative Places. You'll probably have all heard of this. I think they're the experimental ground that's necessary in order to then unlock new creative voices and to make aesthetics like hip hop at the top of their game, because they are.
And they've made it the case, but in some other places it's been very slow to get that consciousness that this is art as well. The art isn't it's not necessarily proscenium marches and.
Well, it was only 20, 30 odd years ago that certain galleries wouldn't accept certain expressions within their spaces because they were seen as not
vandalism.
As high.
And now Banksy sells for. Anyway, we must move on. How have cuts to arts funding affected you, your organisation, or those around you?
Town Hall Symphony Hall over the last 5 years has had its funding cut by 50%, so Birmingham City Council funding. And they're still our main sponsor, so we still do incredibly well. And I think one thing it's made us do is look more at ourselves as a business. We're now a business of change. We're not scared to evaluate ourselves or to review what we're doing. It really works for us being people that now have to really look at what we're doing and become, even our overheads. So it costs a fortune to turn our lights on each day. So actually we've had to cut our opening hours. So Town Hall is only available on a day when there's a show.
Does that mean you take less risks with the programme, do you think?
Well, I don't work in programming, but I've seen some changes while I've been here. And I think, it does mean that we have to be slightly careful, and some of our more commercial shows take the front of the queue, and which is such a shame, because I think for everyone that works in an arts organisation, be it our one or kind of a grassroots one, you want to be able to take risks. You want to have something that starts a conversation. You want to be like, ooh, this, if we put a show on, we're like, well, we're not sure if this will sell. It's actually really exciting, but we're controlled by a board, and of course, it's all about making sure that we're staying afloat despite having cuts.
I think the investment is important, and when you have cuts, you can't innovate with your flyover kind of projects, or if you ring fence them, you can protect them for sure. I think from an Arts Council point of view, it's quite interesting because losing 34% of Treasury money is a significant amount of money. However, there has been an increase in lottery money, and there has been a good settlement that the chairman and the CEO have been able to agree with the government for the next sort of 3 to 4 years.
Has that engendered any change in philosophy because of this change? That they said, like, we want you to look at this more, or engagement less?
The philosophy shift is more around from subsidy to investment. So it's looking at investing into organisations who are prepared to shift and change and not whinge. So it's not about whinge culture, absolutely not. This is about innovation, it's about sustaining and creating new forms of excellence.
What advice can you offer to artists and arts organisations on surviving and thriving in times of austerity?
Oh, yeah, I was just on the cuts front, and also related to that, I think it's very easy to start talking in this end of days fashion about all of that being rolled back and it disintegrating and us shifting to this world where we're totally reliant on philanthropists and commercial sponsorship, and I just don't think that's where we're heading, and we have to fight that because we will end up much the poorer for it. And the key thing is really sending out the message to the startups, the small organisations and the artists that their doors are still open to them, because if we're constantly talking about cuts and austerity and at the same time the arts education sector is getting slashed away, then a whole generation will kind of think, okay, well, it's not for me, I can't afford to justify an arts course, and I can't get my festival off the ground because no one's going to fund it. And so I think I would hope that the people in charge of the purse strings are not going to retrench and become more conservative just because there's less money around, but take more risks. And in my experience, we've struggled in some ways, but we've actually thrived and grown over the last few years. In terms of advice to artists, just be clear on what it is and what you're good at, and stick to your guns, because good ideas will rise to the top.
That's resilience, isn't it? Resilience is about being authentic and having ambition and being relevant as well. Actually think, what does your audience want or need? So those 3 key things, and just seize every opportunity and every partnership.
And we should open doors. I profoundly feel, if we've got a door half open, then we should be trying to drag everybody else through it and find a way to enable them to thrive. And again, talked to lots of artists at the start of their careers over the last month, and if there's a way we can open a door and help them make that next step, not do it for them, but help them find the means to do it, then that's what we should be doing.
Do you think, again, we've only got 7 minutes left to talk about everything, but do you think there are implications if the private sector is plugging the gap that local authority spending or local funding cuts are leaving?
I think the biggest challenge at the moment is the local authorities. If you think about them going to zero funding, and how that's going to be overcome. There are some strategies in place looking at, working with. I mean, there's a whole inquiry in Birmingham, for example, about how we can, in Birmingham, rethink how we work with the corporate sector to it might be a culture tax of some sort. I don't know. I mean, these options are there, but you do need to have a mix so you don't lose that kind of sort of innovative, kind of edgy sort of work that sometimes corporates might shy away from because it impacts on their sort of brand and association. You know, it's a tricky one. But coming back to the, you know, what do you do in this moment? I think this is the moment to collaborate, create partnerships which are long-term, and collaborations whereby new innovations come out of. And it is about actually being bolder at this moment, thinking bigger, and going beyond the kind of the inner expectations, and trying to challenge oneself about who one is in relationship to the potential opportunity.
I think there's a huge responsibility that nobody's mentioned yet, which is the audience as well. If everybody paid to go and see the shows they wanted to see, if everybody on my Facebook page bought a copy of every publication I released, I would never need any funding from anywhere. So I get all this, and I think it's right and proper to have these conversations. Collaboration, I think, is key. But there's also a responsibility. You know, if you're an artist and you see something being promoted in your local show, put that £5 in your pocket in their coffers. Go and support it. Wait for them to support you. Keep that moving, and then everything else will settle. And it will shift. I mean, you've operated Flatpack under, as you said, just before the crash, so you've had to deal with it in certain landscapes. But if the audience takes some responsibility over endorsing the arts on every level, from Orchestra of the Swan to some drum and bass gig at the Hare and Hounds, then it will function. And I think that's...
I think there's still, on top of that, has to be a space for exposing people to things they haven't seen before. And my metaphor for fly on the show is often, how do you know you don't like lobster if you've only been fed McDonald's your whole life? You know, you can set things up in an environment that's accessible, but you need to make people feel entitled.
Sure.
And one thing I'll just say very openly, I think is a barrier to people feeling they can even apply for funding in the first place is there are spaces still in our city where people just don't feel comfortable to go. To ask to knock the door in the first place. And these silos have to be broken down, and that will have an impact on funding.
There's also a level of bureaucry with the funding applications that mystifies the life out of it. It's awful. So if you're 16 years old and you're trying to...
And it's become better, actually. It's actually improved it, but it's still scary.
Oh, it's still scary. No, totally, absolutely. Every time you think, oh, this isn't going to be too bad, it's only 5 or 6 questions, and you do one yourself and think, this is really
it's all the review and evaluation as well. So you have the application, then it's like, oh, in 2 weeks' time we need to see this, we need to be, you know, and we need it in 6 copies.
But this has been a really interesting conversation. We've just got one very pertinent question left. What meaningful actions will you undertake in the coming year to further engagement in and the appreciation of the arts in Birmingham? I love your keenness, bro. I don't even have
I'm really proud to work on the Flyover show with you, and I'm
great plug.
No, but true. I'm so chuffed it's come back. I think it just should be more supported by the city. That's my only thing. But projects like that, I will throw my weight behind, and I'm understanding of the budget constraints to it, and I'm understanding of my time constraints. But I will give my time for that. The other side of it is I am trying to encourage people with Birmingham Review to pay a cover charge. We used to do it. We used to have subscriptions. It's that. It's that £2, £3, £5 coming in at every point, and it's the culture of that. The internet has created a wonderful world of free media. It's also created a terrible world of garrulous media. But within that, people have been reignited into things in print or on screen. But so my involvement in my little sector is just to try and encourage, to support the projects such as the Flyover show that absolutely stand out, and then to try and encourage people to play their part. The audiences to play their part too.
I mean, I think we've just done IDFB, and some of the things we were determined to do this time was in terms of the international representation, to have an international representation that would speak to people within the city in terms of the diversity that it brought in, because you can be international and just bring in the usual suspects, or you can be international and bring in more interesting people. And I think Planning 2018 will do that. One of our other ambitions was actually to get out of the city centre. We did a little bit of it, but not anything like as much as we wanted, and that is definitely something for next festival we want to work on. It's actually being out there where people are, rather than expecting people who we know won't come into the city centre to come in, because we know that doesn't happen for many people.
From an Arts Council point of view, the biggest sort of meaningful action going forward is to get the model right with the local authority, so that the investment into the kind of the organisations and the network of and the ecology itself continues to grow and develop innovative, exciting, important work that's going to put Birmingham in a stronger place.
Makes a lot of sense. Ian, any sage words to add?
So we are going to keep doing what we're doing, and there's a danger when you run an organisation that puts on events that you become very you get tunnel vision, then you plan for your festival, and I'm trying to pull out of that a little bit more and think about the joining up infrastructure stuff that I've already talked about. And I'm allergic to meetings, but go to a few more of those meetings if they're going to help us achieve this kind of joint vision that I think we that we need, that will take the city to the next level. And I'm not going to do it myself, but I would also say we need some decent cultural listings for the city, an easier way to find out what's going on. Not to knock what's on as a magazine. That's great, but I think someone, please God, put some.
I'm trying.
I think there's space for stuff nationally, because I'm looking for stuff to do all over the country, and time out doesn't suffice for London. So I think there's a space in Birmingham to do something that's
it's a lot of work. That's it. Compiling all of that is a massive amount of work, but I do think that's one of the big things. People just don't know stuff's going on.
Sally,
I think personally, I'm going to take more risks with what I'm going to see. I'm very good at telling people that, there's loads of cool things going on, but I tend to go, I'm busy, I'm going to go home and watch EastEnders or something. So personally, that's for me. But professionally, I think we need to be engaging kind of really young philanthropists at a kind of a level that they feel that they can afford, and then with benefits and activities around that get them more involved with things that we're doing in Town Hall, Symphony Hall, because they're going to be kind of the people that are supporting the arts in the future. So definitely need to be doing more with that.
On a personal level, away from Arts Council and all the rest of it, I think for me it's about getting away from the desk mentality. Getting out there, getting into spaces, being uncomfortable, and connecting with forms and locations that are not on your radar. So from that, many great things have happened. I mean, all my best projects, I think, have come on the road in different places, different parts of the world even. And it's just taking that all in and making things happen. And being a bit opportunistic as well, and not worrying about strategy too much, and just getting on with, exciting things that matter and that are urgent.
It's a funny one, also more karmically, people will tell you, those who are chasing after money sometimes aren't the ones who get it, and chasing after a passion and conviction. But at the same time, it's you don't just want your talents to be exploited and to be squandered either.
Very true.
So I'd say that's one skill that you spend a lifetime trying to learn, like what point to picture your own value and your own worth. But this has been, personally, collectively, a really, really good chat.
Great.
Yeah,
Did I leave anything out? No. Right?
Good look at the list of questions here.
Yeah. Do you just want to read off all that? I was expecting more.
I've got loads, I mean, I've got statistics, I've got programmes that the Arts Council have been
overhead
investing
projections and PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's all there.
Actually, that might be quite interesting. You just left that on the table and walked out.
We'll take care of it.
We'll take care of that,